Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Today, as you can see, we're going to talk about a little bit related to the passing of Queen Elizabeth, the United States Constitution, and why, at least I feel, it still reigns supreme for now. I'm Professor Chris Cragness. I teach over in the School of Business, but as many of you know, I'm a lawyer by trade, and so have a significant interest in our Constitution, obviously. And to answer that first question of why might we be here, well, not officially today, but we're celebrating it today as Constitution Day of 2022. It's the anniversary of the September 17th signing of the Constitution. I didn't figure most of you would want to try to show up on a Saturday, so we thought we'd do it on a day that would work out for everyone and discuss the significance of the Constitution. So you may be wondering, why are we going to talk about Queen Elizabeth? Why are we going to talk about her passing when we're talking about the celebration of our Constitution? And let's just start with this. A little bit of history and power of a monarchy. There's a reason I have God save the blank at this point in time, and it's to signify we do things a little bit different on this side of the pond. We have a democracy. If, God forbid, any one of our leaders, President of the United States, were to pass in office or while leading our country, our national anthem wouldn't change. It wouldn't instantaneously be different. We have that consistency. As opposed to, in England, the national anthem, immediately upon Queen Elizabeth taking her last breath, changed to end with God Save the King. Now, I'm not saying that's bad, but it does show a little bit of a difference in how we are looking at things and what we do. That being said, it is important to have a little bit of context, why it's somewhat important to me. Those of you that have had me as a professor, you've heard me talk about the Queen and the royalty a little bit. I don't believe we have anybody in this room that I can tell that is over 70 years old. What's the significance of somebody being over 70 years old right now? They'd be the only person that might be able to remember the last time there was a different monarch before Queen Elizabeth. That is how long she ruled. She lived till she was 96, started at age 26, had an incredible 70-year run, for lack of better terms. But how that relates to us is, believe it or not, and hopefully many of you have been taught this, at one point in time, our founding fathers were contemplating what type of government were we going to have. And there was a big push for a particular type of government. And what type of government might that be? The monarch. And so hopefully from your history classes, you've learned that George Washington, they wanted to anoint him King George and have a monarch type rule. And instead, and I think for the better, we ended up with something completely different. We ended up with the Constitution. We ended up with what we refer to as our Bill of Rights. We ended up with those first 10 amendments to the Constitution that allow us to have unfettered, absolutely unfettered personal freedoms. We, unlike many countries around the world, our service members, President Duffy being a former service member, along with maybe some of our students, they fight for a piece of paper for all practical purposes. It may not seem like it's only a piece of paper, but at the end of the day, it is. And we can say that it's the most important piece of paper in the world, because for the better part of a couple hundred years, we have respected this one piece of paper that you could crumple up, you could burn, you could throw away, but we haven't. And men and women have put their lives on the line so that some of us can even say things that might even be against the government. A shocker there. that you have that ability to do that. The difference with the monarch, and some of the differences that we have related to Queen Elizabeth and how they handle things in England, our document starts with "we the people." And that's not to say that under a monarch they're not concerned about the people and the people aren't collective. But we start this with "we the people" because it is about us. It's about we. It's about those individuals that are involved. It's about the citizens. It's about the right to be able to say what you want. Many of you might not be aware, but in England, technically, now King Charles, if he wanted to, could change the prime minister. They have that power. It's not one that they exercise much anymore. It's more of an approval power now. But the way that their constitutional monarch is written, he actually has that power to do so. This might be even scarier for you to think. In the United States, does the president have the authority to declare war? No. Commander-in-Chief has the ability to send troops, to start one, and what we hope for most of the time is to finish one, but has that ability. But the declaration is only from we the people. How? Through your elected representatives, through your senators, through your representatives. The declaration of war actually comes from Congress. Technically, Queen Elizabeth, now King Charles, is the head of the military in England and can unilaterally make that decision. How that would work is a little bit different. I think in the historical context, it may have been honored. In now the traditional context, I don't know that the citizens of England, Parliament, would necessarily go along with that type of declaration. But the point is, it's a lot of power vested in one individual, and arguably without a check and balance, which is what our Constitution is all about. And we have seen that Constitution challenged as of late. We have seen different factions within our population not getting along. And guess what? That's happened before. And that piece of paper has survived. So as we look at why our Constitution reigns supreme, and yes, that's meant to be a play on the words of a monarchy reigning over their subjects, we have to consider, how does that actually work? Why do we honor this piece of paper? So I didn't know President Duffy was going to be here, but I'm going to put him on the spot real fast. Well, welcome to Professor Cragness's class. I've got a group of students back here going, he does this to us every day. So,
People do it to me.
So what's the importance of a piece of paper?
Well, it's the rules and guidelines that all citizens have to abide by, regardless of what their position is. That's the rules. That's the requirements.
Yeah, but come on. We all play Monopoly. There's rules, there's guidelines there. Who follows all the rules in Monopoly?
Well, I'd say also the balance between the powers.
Yeah.
That's really the difference.
And that's the thing. It's about the respect. We, of course, look at different rules and regulations, and in theory, there's a couple roads around here that have a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. Some of us may treat those as a suggestion. Maybe it's not, but it's a rule that we kind of look at, and some of us will say, I don't really need to follow that one, or at least within reason, but we don't get that ability when it comes to the Constitution. And that's all because of you and the people and your ability to understand that there are certain rules that we cannot just cast aside. There are certain rules that we have to follow, and that document, in the brilliance of the Founding Fathers, having those built-in checks and balances, if for no other reason, is what has allowed it to stand the test of time. No one area of our government can, in theory, get out of control because there is a check and balance. We're seeing a lot of things in our history, in our lifetime, that we haven't seen. There have been executive branch scandals in many other, generations. There have been congressional scandals. There have been judicial scandals. We're just kind of living through, in the last arguably 15, 20 years, of some change. But yet one thing has still prevailed, and that's that document. We had an election. We followed the process. Some of us might not like it. Some of us loved it. Who knows? But at the end of the day, the vast majority of we the people have accepted it. And that's really why it still reigns supreme. Because we look at things and we understand that this is important. We can't just cast aside. This isn't make-believe. This isn't Monopoly where we want to change the rules. And we all know we have to change the rules, otherwise that game that might have started on Saturday morning will go sometime into Monday. This is different. This is much different. So, when you think of the Constitution now and where it's going to take us, just a show of hands, how many of you are just concerned about the state of our political affairs? You don't have to agree with one side or the other. That's not what I'm getting at. But how many of you are concerned about just what's going on in our world today? Sure. I don't know how you can't be. It's very divisive. I'm not sure that our founding fathers didn't think that that wouldn't happen someday, quite honestly. There's many things that document has planned for, some unintentionally, some intentionally. And when I get, to the end, and I want to make sure that I leave time for people to, ask a few questions and have lunch, it's important that we look at where do we go in the future. And make no mistake, one thing hasn't changed in quite some time. And I forget, and I should know this, but I forget the last time in terms of the year that we actually amended the Constitution. But it's been a while. It's been a long while. Which means no matter what's happened, no matter what political party is leading, no matter what political party is in the minority, no matter what group, no matter what faction of these parties, because I think we could all agree that there might be two main parties, but there seems to be sub-parties with each one of those parties. One thing still reigns supreme, and it's that document that has not changed. It has not been altered. It is still the document that says, hey, look, when we get to this problem, we have a solution. If the executive branch does something and oversteps their bounds, well, Congress or maybe the judiciary has the ability to do something. If the judiciary does something that oversteps their bounds, Congress and the executive branch can do something. If Congress does something that oversteps their bounds, lo and behold, the judiciary and the executive branch can do something. That hasn't changed. But what could change that? And this is part of what I want you to think about, because we just had the passing of Queen Elizabeth, her reign for 70 years. I mean, there was a lot of respect given. People didn't always believe in what she was doing or agree with what she was doing, but they always respected the limited role and the limited powers that she still maintained. That's what it's going to take for us in the future. That's where all of you, we the people, have to be willing to set aside, this just happened, I don't like it, but I have to respect it and I have to live with it. And that's the importance of the Constitution. That's the document that says you need to do this because it's the set of rules that many people have fought for, so that, guess what? We can have the freedom to go ahead and argue with each other and, frankly, not like each other at times and really be irritated with each other at times. We're given that ability. At the most recent White House Correspondents' Dinner, the moderator was, of course, roasting everybody. And I think it was it Noah that I think was doing the moderation, and giving everybody a hard time, and spared no expense. I mean, if you want some good humor, go to YouTube, Google and search, the White House Correspondents' Dinner 2022. Everybody gets just absolutely grilled. But he ended it with one thing. He said, I just stood up here and I made fun of arguably the most powerful man in the world, the leader of the United States of America. And guess what? I knew I was going to be okay. That's the society that we live in and we don't want to lose. Because I will challenge you with this thought. If you were to go watch that, do you think that could happen in Russia? Do you think somebody could stand up in front of the Chinese leader and make fun of him? Well, you could. I think the concern would be what's going to happen after. And here we take it in stride because we have that freedom granted to us by many people that have fought for it, but more importantly, granted by, again, a simple piece of paper signed by a bunch of people that over time, individuals have said, this is what's most important. So as we look at in the future, we go back to the Constitutional Convention. And this exchange is thought to have occurred. There's debate as to whether this is the exact wording and whatnot. But a lady asked Benjamin Franklin, well, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy? And his response, a republic, replied Franklin, if you can keep it. So do we want to keep it? It seems pretty good so far, even for all of its faults. Students in my class have heard me refer to our justice system as flawed, as problematic, as having significant issues. But they've also heard me then say, it's still the best in the world. I wouldn't trade it for anybody else's judicial system. I consider our form of government the same. Do we have our flaws? Absolutely. Do we have our issues? Of course. Are there things that trouble us? You bet. Is there a different system in the world that we would rather have? I hope not, because I haven't seen it yet. And while I love the monarchy, and yes, I had the crush on Princess Di when I was growing up, loved her to death, I love the pomp and circumstance of it, at the end of the day, it scares me that in theory, one person can make decisions that have no check and balance, that nobody could tell them no to. And that's not the system that we want to be a part of. So for all of you that are in college now and thinking about things in the future, you are our future. Many of us, we're getting into the past, and we're still going to be around for a while, but we're not the future. It falls upon you to respect and honor that simple phrase, we the people, and decide what all of you want to do with that phrase. Because remember, we doesn't mean you have to agree. We doesn't even mean you have to see eye to eye. But we the people means one thing, that you have to respect those views. So I encourage you, sit down with somebody that maybe disagrees with you on something and see if you can talk out an issue and see if you can find middle ground, or at least you can respect what the other person says. Because while it doesn't always look like it, that's in theory what our branches of government are doing. They'll talk about things, they'll pass laws, maybe some are constitutional, maybe some aren't. They'll do different things, but at the end of the day, if it followed the process it was supposed to, they respect it. Supreme Court might not like it, but if Congress and the President passed a law that says, 9 we don't like, we're going to have 59 now, they'd have to live with it. A law gets passed, Supreme Court says it's unconstitutional, Congress and the President got to figure out, okay, what can we do to make it constitutional? But we don't pick up guns and go to the Supreme Court and go, no, rule in our favor. I mean, there's been a lot of controversial issues that have come up, and yet we respect them. And guess what we're doing as an electorate right now? The electorate, we the people, are figuring out ways of, okay, we didn't like that ruling, so we're going to figure out a way that we can make it the way we want it to be, through our voice. And that's the future of our Constitution. It's all on you. So I hope you can accept that challenge. All right, any questions? Silence, just like in class sometimes, right? No questions. Yeah.
Been reading some analysis as of late about the peaceful transition of power, and what I'm hearing is that it's largely based on good faith of our leadership, and there's not a lot of protection of that in the Constitution. Do you agree with that analysis? And if so, do you think that'll change? Or?
I wholeheartedly agree with that analysis, that there is no transfer of power rules buried in the Constitution. If you read the Constitution itself, one, it's a hard read. It's sometimes confusing, but it's very broad. That being said, there really isn't any formal transfer of power that we've codified or passed statutes for. It is largely ceremonial. It would be, I don't ever want to see it, but it would be interesting what would happen someday on January 20th if somebody said, I'm not leaving. Well, that would be something. Why? Because we've never seen it before. And so maybe it will change. And I think we're seeing one of those examples with, even though I think the law is clear enough that the vice president's role is ceremonial, Congress is going back and saying, yeah, we're going to make it more clear. And the irony, of course, is both sides of the aisle are thinking that's a good idea. Both sides are recognizing, no, we don't want that one person that might not be from our party to be able to say, no, we're not counting these votes. We're setting those aside. And ironically enough, that's not in the Constitution. That's been codified. But yeah, it's a great question, and it is very, very traditional. It's important that we follow the tradition, but we don't have any real rules about it. And I do think that will ultimately change, because maybe we need them now. Anyone else? Yeah.
So, kind of going on the monarchy side, in the past you've seen Charles say a lot of things that normally you don't see a future monarch say with climate change wise, stand on that. Do you ever see him taking more of a political side versus that quiet Queen Elizabeth?
Yeah, and what's fascinating about that question is we don't really have in our lifetimes anything to draw back and look back on, because Queen Elizabeth was there for 70 years. And the monarch is a traditional, impartial role, or it's supposed to be. King Charles, when he was Prince Charles, didn't follow that as a prince. He has claimed that he's going to be impartial on those issues going forward. I can't imagine, though, as king, he's not going to try to exude some influence on things that matter to him. It's going to just be delicate how he does it. That being said, is it any different than any politician from, again, either side of the aisle? I'm not picking on anyone. They say one thing to their base. Okay, I got past the primary. Now I need to appeal to everybody as a whole, and miraculously their viewpoint changes, and generally it gets softer. I think he'll soften his views, but the interesting part about that is with Queen Elizabeth's passing, there's already many countries that are technically under, the monarch umbrella that are talking about leaving, because now would be the time. One, Charles isn't that popular. Two, the Queen has finally passed, and it won't look politically bad that they're leaving when there's this changeover. So yeah, very, very interesting. As a side note, the members of Parliament all had to pledge their loyalty to King Charles. That's part of the monarch system. How do you think that'd go over right about now, all members of Congress having to pledge their loyalty to the President of the United States? And I think that's a stretch. I would never want to see that. I think they all need to respect the leader of our office, but I can't imagine forcing any citizen to pledge a loyalty to that one person. You might be able to pledge that loyalty to the office, but can you imagine being told, oh, the Queen's dead, King Charles is coming in, and all of you need to pledge your loyalty? That's why our system's a little bit better, I think. Any other questions?
Chris, when it comes
Yeah.
to balance of power, and what's always concerned me a little bit is when you get all of them together at the same party. And and talk a little bit about, if you would, the check and balance there that really has stopped and at times stopped the majority of all to move forward on some things. And I think that's why the judiciary is important.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, because even though over time people figure out which side I lean towards, even though I might lean towards one side, it always does bother me when one party, including the party I might lean towards, has control of everything. We lose a little bit of that check and balance. More importantly, what seems to happen is we lose a little bit of the moderate aspect. The center of the country kind of gets left by those two parties and some of the more staunch views of those parties. Now, as it relates to the court right now, you could argue that the court has a conservative slant to it right now. That might be a polite way of putting it. And while I may not personally agree with some of the rulings, part of me is comforted that there's a more conservative court right now when we have one party in control of another branch or both branches of government. And the problem that we have is the Supreme Court stays around for a long time. And so what happens when they control all branches in theory? And is that what you were? Yeah, that's a potential issue, because I think we start to lose faith as citizens when we perceive one side has all the power. And maybe that's a problem that we're going to have to deal with. I hope not. But there certainly has been violations of traditions by both sides in the last 10, 15, 20 years, which is causing issues, to say the least. Yeah.
You mentioned some countries dropping from the monarchy. Do you think that they would possibly adopt sort of documentation like we have in the future? Do you think that we would do that?
Yeah, I'm not sure what they'll do, because the monarch and the monarchy is really more traditional and ceremonial now. A lot of these countries have their own technical rule, but I do think once they make that step, it does lead them to at least open the discussion of, do we want to have a more democratic form of government, more of a republic than what we've been under? It may. I don't know which countries might, but it could definitely lead in that direction. Anyone else? All right. Oh, question?
Why is there a trend toward the, you say, because you call it a republic and you call it conservatism, but we find that there's very much extreme radicalism within the conservative party. So can you really call them conservatives if they're very radical?
Yeah, I think that can go both ways. I think we can look at one side and be casting a radical, label, which I don't want to get into labels. We can look at another side and say that it's much more progressive in nature. I think we're in an interesting time, and this is something all of you need to remember. In the course of history, and I know President Duffy has studied a lot of the world history through his military background, we're still a pretty young country. In the grand scheme of things, we're still maybe not in our infancy, but I'm not sure we've exited middle school yet as a country. And if all of you remember middle school, who wants to go back there? Those might be some of the growing pains that we're dealing with. What we may be being a part of, and hopefully still within my lifetime I'll see it, we might truly be seeing the birth of a true three-party system, going far right, some section's going to go far left, and then there's going to be a bunch of people in the middle. And I don't know that that'll be bad, because again, if we all have to try to figure out a way to get along, perfect. So we might just be a part of that right now. But we're definitely seeing it on both sides getting a little bit more, maybe aggressive is a good word for both sides. All right. Anyone else? Yeah.
In terms of like polarization and one party always having control, would you say that we would be more strict about term limits, or what's kind of your
Well, term limits in what regard?
just overall and like rules?
Yeah, I mean,
I feel like wouldn't that like touch on what you say about if somebody would say like, oh, I'm just not gonna leave office. I'm just gonna stay in there forever. Like, how do we run against that? Or
sure. Well, I mean, we have a term limitation on the President of the United States. Some states have instituted term limitations on their politicians. I certainly wouldn't be personally opposed to a term limit, just because that may allow us to do things more. And yes, if you need to head to class and whatnot, please, I understand, go ahead. I think it might help, but as long as we, the people, make that decision.
yeah, like how do we come to an agreement on that? Because everyone has different ideas. That's
Sure. That's what democracy is all about, though. Ebb and flow, discuss, disagree, agree, and come to a compromise.
So wouldn't the Congress have to vote on term limits for themselves?
They would.
So how would that ever happen? Because you would know a Chuck Grassley ain't gonna be voting for any limit.
Yeah, that has been the problem traditionally. When it comes to Congress, they don't normally want to limit themselves. And in fact, a lot of people aren't aware that many of the laws that get passed by Congress, they specifically exempt themselves from, which I think is the definition of irony. But, I'll leave that for a different, maybe that'll be our topic next year. Yeah, it would be a good one. But yeah, they would be the ones that would have to limit themselves. And maybe it'll come to that someday. Maybe not. But yeah, term limits I think wouldn't hurt, but I don't know that we'll ever see it. Yeah.
So there are some groups out there, if they're on Facebook or on the internet, they're not hard to find, where they take the Constitution and they take it word for word for word, but the Constitution is wrong. So what would be a good, like, personal way to see it if it's broad, but these groups want to take it word for word for word?
Well, this is where the debate comes in. Is the Constitution broad? If we read it as a whole, sure. But are we supposed to read it that way? Are we supposed to read it literally? Some parts maybe yes, some parts maybe no. That's why we have a Supreme Court that helps us interpret. But there's no doubt in any written document, you can alter the meaning when you take just certain pieces. And we can do that with anything. We can twist any words that we want to do. Your question leads us to the big problem that we have now. The one beautiful thing about free speech is that we get to say what we want. In today's technological age, that's the one area that I don't know that the Founding Fathers had anticipated, that anything can be disseminated instantaneously, and that's a problem. Yeah.
So another thing I noticed too with that is that these groups talk about American morality. What does it mean to be American? In reference to Constitution. And do you think as Americans now compared to our forefathers or beginners that we've drifted away and being deep thinkers with morality?
Yeah, you're going to try and get me in trouble here. I'm being recorded, and no, I think our society as a whole has lost many of its skills to think deeply. And I think a lot of that is because we have instant access to things, we have confirmation bias, and all of us have it in some form, which is simply we want to find things that support our view. And it's so easy to do that now on the internet. And that's unfortunate. And I don't think enough people do a deep dive into issues to form opinions. And quite frankly, it's lost from some of the sciences. The sciences, when we were in school, taught us we had to go through certain steps. We couldn't skip these steps. We had to go through them all to confirm that we had this right. We don't teach as much science in the schools as I'd like to. I hated it, by the way, but that's a different issue. We don't teach it enough. I was forced to do it. I learned a lot of thinking skills through that, and I think we're losing some of that. I think that's a valid point.
Yeah, I think some people argue that if you're going to have a true democracy, one of the requirements is to have an informed electorate. And that is one of the hallmarks of a healthy democracy, is that it's dependent upon your electorate being informed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. All right, any others? Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming, and I appreciate it, and we'll have a different topic next year.